In the summer of 1955, Lila Merritt rode her bright-colored little bike around the Sloan Avenue neighborhood, just a few blocks from home, in a place where everyone felt absolutely safe. 10 minutes later, she turned onto the road behind Henderson's Market and vanished. No cry for help, no footprints, nothing left behind except her bicycle found leaning against a wooden fence. Police searched Lakeland for days, but in the end, the community only received grim news from the canal near Munn Park. The family was told the perpetrator was likely a drifter who had left town. Rumors spread that Lila might have been taken far away, or that someone in the neighborhood knew more than they were willing to say. Lila's younger brother grew up carrying the feeling that he had abandoned his sister. Then, in 2018, the old case files of the Lakeland Police Department were digitized. In a forgotten metal cabinet, a sealed envelope from 1955 was discovered. Inside were pieces of fabric, strands of hair, and skin cells that could not be analyzed at the time. Just a few tiny cells, but modern DNA technology produced a genetic profile that led to a family branch that had once lived right on Sloan Avenue. A name emerged from a list that had previously been ruled out. Someone who had lived quietly for more than 6 decades. Someone who knew every shortcut behind Henderson's Market. Someone who knew exactly which canal at Munn Park was deep enough to hide a secret. Someone who had remained silent for 70 years, waiting until science shattered the perfection of the crime they committed. Before we dive deeper into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love these journeys into forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The summer afternoon of 1955 in Lakeland, Florida draped the Sloan Avenue neighborhood in thick sunlight and the endless droning of cicadas. Small wooden houses stood close together, front porches open to the hot breeze, children playing ball in the shade of old trees in front of the Methodist church at the end of the street. In that familiar scene, siblings Lila Merritt and Tommy rode their bikes around the block, a routine activity whenever they visited their grandparents. Lila's small bicycle rolled along the red dust-covered road, Tommy's rear wheel rattling behind, mixed with bursts of laughter. Lila, with the quick movements and slight stubbornness of a 9-year-old, always rode ahead, and then turned back to check that her little brother was still keeping up. The two turned onto the narrow road leading toward Henderson's Market, the grocery store where neighborhood kids often stopped for popsicles. It was a quiet, narrow path flanked by weathered wooden fences. Lila pedaled into that turn, her brown hair flowing behind her, her figure gradually disappearing behind the shadow of banana trees along the roadside. Tommy slowed down when he saw his sister going farther than usual. He hesitated for a moment, then turned his bike around and headed back toward their grandparents' house, thinking she would return on her own soon, as she always did. When Tommy reached the front porch, Mrs. Merritt was standing at the door wiping a half-washed dish, surprised to see him alone. At first she thought Lila might have stopped to talk to someone, or popped into the store for something, but minutes passed, and Tommy insisted that his sister had turned onto the road behind Henderson's Market, and hadn't come back. The initial confusion slowly turned into uneasy anxiety. Evelyn Merritt, the children's mother, was shaking out a towel in the yard when she heard this, and quickly stepped down the porch stairs. She called her daughter's name, softly at first, then louder as she crossed into neighbors' yards and walked along the street. Window frames creaked open. A few neighbors peeked out as the calls carried on the hot wind. Evelyn headed back toward Henderson's Market, crossing front yards, along fences, scanning the path her daughter had just taken, but the road was empty as if no child had ever passed through. No sound of a bicycle, no small figure, no sign that Lila was still nearby. Panic spread. Evelyn's face grew pale as she asked a few neighbors if anyone had seen Lila ride by. The repeated headshakes made the stifling afternoon air feel even heavier. Tommy stood huddled behind the door, eyes wide with fear, gripping the wooden rame as if waiting for his sister to appear from the familiar corner. When Evelyn reached the end of the road and returned still without a trace of her daughter, the tone in her voice shifted to pure desperation. No one in the small neighborhood had seen Lila head back toward their grandparents' house. The narrow road behind Henderson's Market, where Tommy said he last saw her turn, now lay unnaturally silent. After a few minutes of fruitless searching, Evelyn ran back home, went to the wall-mounted telephone in the kitchen. Her hands shaking, she picked up the receiver and asked to be connected to the Lakeland police. She reported that her daughter had disappeared. The duty phone at the Lakeland Police Department had barely finished ringing when the afternoon shift officer picked it up. Quickly jotting down the details a panicked woman's voice was struggling to convey. He flipped open the duty log, noting the victim's name, age, address, certainty of the disappearance, and marking the priority column for missing children cases. Just a few short lines, but enough for him to realize this was not an ordinary lost child call. A 9-year-old girl turned onto a familiar road and never returned. After confirming the address, he immediately forwarded the information through the internal system and radio, requesting the nearest patrol unit to respond to the Merritt family home without delay. The patrol car received the call just over a minute later and turned onto Sloan Avenue as the sunset lowered. 2 officers arrived at the scene and quickly met Evelyn Merritt, who was still clutching the telephone receiver, unable to put it back on the hook. Her distress was clearly reflected in the preliminary notes the duty officer had passed along. Lila had gone missing only minutes before Evelyn called, and the last confirmed sighting was somewhere around the back of Henderson's Market. Starting with the most basic details, the officers asked Evelyn to recount the entire incident in sequence. Lila and Tommy had ridden away from their grandparents' house. The sister turned onto the road behind the grocery store. The brother headed back, and no one had seen the girl since. They asked about the routes Lila usually took, the siblings' play habits, and the areas the children often visited in the afternoons. Every piece of information was immediately marked on a neighborhood map. From the family's account, police identified the first key point. The row of houses behind Henderson's Market was where Lila had turned, and the last confirmed location. In a small residential area like Sloan Avenue, where everyone knew each other, a child vanishing in just minutes made the officers treat this as a special priority. They began expanding questions to nearby homes. Residents were asked if they had seen any strangers, unfamiliar vehicles, or anything unusual around the time Lila disappeared. Most answers were no, which only made the area behind the store the focal point of the initial investigation. After finishing gathering information from the family and immediate neighbors, police moved to the next step. Cordoning off the routes Lila typically took. They marked places she often stopped, yards where the siblings frequently played, and shortcuts connecting the neighborhood to the grocery store. 3 main search directions were established: the road Lila had turned onto, the vacant lot behind Henderson's Market, and the area bordering the end of Carver Street. In no time, a group of officers was deployed across the location. A circular search method was implemented. Starting from the last sighting point, they swept short segments, gradually moving outward in ever-widening radii. One team headed toward the fences behind residents, checking every opening leading to vacant land. Another advanced behind the store to scan shadowed areas, storage spots, and obscured yards. The remaining team walked along the path to the end of Carver Street, where traffic was light, and there were blind spots that could easily conceal someone. As the officers conducted the search, porch lights at the Merritt home and surrounding houses flicked on one by one. Residents stood on their steps watching, some joining police to check areas near their own homes. No one said it aloud, but a heavy atmosphere spread across Sloan Avenue. From what seemed like a simple duty call, the entire neighborhood and the Lakeland police force had entered an urgent search, centered on a narrow road leading behind Henderson's Market, where every trace of Lila Merritt had abruptly stopped. As the search teams expanded their perimeter around the area behind Henderson's Market, an elderly man from a house just a few doors down began approaching the group of officers sweeping the scene. He had stood on his porch for a long while, hesitation clear in the way he gripped the wooden railing, as if weighing whether the information he held was truly relevant or just coincidence. An officer noticed him and walked over to ask, and only then did the man speak, quietly mentioning that he might have seen what the police were looking for. He introduced himself as a longtime resident of the neighborhood, rarely missing any activity near his home, and at the time Lila disappeared, he was working in his backyard. When asked specifically, he said that while tending plants, he heard the slow rattling sound of a vehicle on the road behind Henderson's Market. That sound was familiar to him, the distinctive horse engine of old pickup trucks that often passed through the area. But right after, he heard hurried footsteps, and a sound he described as similar to dragging or muffling someone. He turned to look and saw a man carrying a small girl toward the open door of a black pickup truck. According to him, the man acted very quickly and decisively, as if he knew exactly what needed to be done. He didn't see the face clearly because the man kept his head low, but he remembered the build was fairly young, not too tall, and the stride confident. The black pickup looked old, short bed style, with a lower cargo bed than newer models, a detail anyone familiar with vehicles would notice right away. He also noted the paint was somewhat faded, with a long scratch along the edge of the passenger side door, something he happened to catch as the late afternoon light reflected off the metal surface. After placing the girl, whom he believed was Lila, into the truck, the man immediately walked around to the driver's side and started the engine. The vehicle rolled away from the neighborhood toward the dirt road leading out of the town center. The witness said he stood frozen for a few seconds, trying to process what he had just seen. At first he thought it might be a relative rushing a child somewhere in an emergency, but the haste and unusual behavior made him uneasy. Only when he saw police flooding the neighborhood did he realize he had witnessed a critical moment. The witness's information was immediately recorded and passed to the investigation team. This was the first piece that helped shape a clearer picture that Lila had not simply wandered off, but had been taken from the area. A black pickup truck, though not rare in 1955, was still distinctive when described in such detail. The man's build, rapid actions, and departure route toward open land outside town were all valuable details. Police quickly cross-referenced this statement with what had been gathered in the previous phases of the investigation. The route Lila turned onto before disappearing matched the direction where the truck appeared. The land behind Henderson's market had many hidden spots, perfectly suited for someone to suddenly approach a child without drawing much attention. The strong afternoon wind made the metal sheets behind the store rattle, which could explain why sounds from the scene didn't reach nearby homes, accounting for why only one witness saw the abnormality. One officer was assigned to document the full statement, including the truck's style, faded black paint, low bed, long scratch on the passenger door, the man's build, and the direction the vehicle left. All those details, though not yet enough to identify a suspect, showed this was the most important lead since the investigation began. It shifted the team from searching for a possibly lost child to concluding that Lila's disappearance involved abduction. When the recording was complete, the witness was asked to keep the information confidential and to contact them if he remembered anything else. Police quickly adjusted the investigation direction, shifting focus to tracking down the black pickup truck and identifying individuals matching the description. In a situation where every passing minute could mean life or death, that man's statement became the pivotal marker, opening the next path in the pursuit of Lila Merritt's trail. The testimony of the man living near Henderson's market immediately shifted the investigation's focus more intensely to the area behind the store, where shadows and narrow pathways could conceal an entire incident in just seconds. Officers on the scene determined that the dirt road behind the store where the witness had seen a man carrying a little girl was a critical point for expanding the search. Tension spread as they collectively shifted formation, meticulously sweeping every section of ground and every corner of nearby homes bordering the area. Residents in the neighborhood, after hearing about the new testimony, stood on their porches or voluntarily assisted by pointing out shortcuts that children often used to the police. Several mentioned that the road behind the store branched into many small paths, leading to vacant lots and the row of old wooden houses behind Carver Street. This information helped the search team better map out the area's structure, which was more complex than the peaceful appearance of Sloan Avenue suggested. Officers fanned out in different directions. The first group advanced into the rear of Henderson's market, where the old brick wall created long patches of shadow. They scanned every meter of ground, shining lights into narrow gaps between crates and fence. Footsteps kicking up thin dust left streaky marks, and flashlights sweeping the surface spots where the soil was unusually compacted or disturbed. The ground showed signs of someone passing through in hurried strides, but no clear footprints remained due to the dry and loose surface. Another group moved toward the opening connecting the store's rear to the path between Sloan Avenue and Carver Street. This was a narrow road rarely used in the afternoon, lined with tall wooden fences and a few wild bushes stretching along the way. The scene was so quiet that the officers' footsteps became the only sound echoing. The bushes along the wall formed key inspection points, as any item dropped during a struggle could have snagged there. Officers bent down to check each foliage cluster, carefully lifting branches to expose the ground beneath, but found nothing belonging to Lila. From the far end of the path, an officer's voice called out. He stood near the old wooden fence, signaling his colleagues to approach. Leaning against the fence base, A small bicycle emerged in the flashlight beam, standing out with its familiar faded paint. The front wheel was slightly tilted, the handlebars caught on a wooden slat, as if the bike had been hastily set down or tossed to the side. It was Lila's bicycle. The area around the bike was immediately cordoned off to avoid disturbing the ground. Officers noted the bike's position, its angle, the distance from the fence, and the direction the wheels were facing. There were no signs of prolonged skidding, suggesting the bike hadn't been dragged forcefully but simply abandoned suddenly. This location was right in the middle of Lila's usual route, and the path leading to the area where the witness had seen the black pickup truck. A coincidence, or more accurately, a crucial link. The bicycle became the first and only piece of evidence, at that point, opening up more speculations. Lila may have been approached right at this spot. The perpetrator apparently wasted no time hiding the bike. The act happened so quickly that it left few traces. Leaving the bike in the narrow path suggested the perpetrator wanted to leave the area as soon as possible, heading toward less frequented spots, or routes leading straight to the open land on the town's outskirts. Other officers continued probing the small paths, branching from the bicycle's location to potential areas. Each path was assessed for terrain features: the dirt road leading to the fields behind Carver Street, the trail cutting through wide grassy lots, the row of old wooden houses once used as storage sheds. All could have been places where the perpetrator loaded Lila into a vehicle without being seen. More importantly, these routes allowed a small truck to move without drawing much attention. The discoveries in this search phase didn't yield an immediate breakthrough, but the bicycle's presence in a narrow and relatively secluded spot helped investigators better understand the perpetrator's movements. The bike appeared exactly where a child could be approached unobstructed, and that became the point where they focused attention on the surrounding routes. From the moment the bicycle was pulled from the shadows of the wooden fence, the investigation's scope narrowed and became more directed. The potential path of the person who took Lila gradually emerged on maps of residential streets and interspersed vacant lands around Sloan Avenue, like faint threads but enough for investigators to keep following in the rapidly expanding urgent search phase. The discovery of Lila's bicycle on the narrow path connecting the residential area to the land behind the grocery store shifted the investigation's focus entirely toward the hypothesis involving the black pickup truck described by the witness. Officers at the scene relayed the information to headquarters to immediately activate the vehicle screening process in the area, as a short black truck with an older style and a long scratch on the passenger door wasn't the kind of vehicle hard to identify if they knew where to look. Though dark-colored trucks were common in 1955, the specific details from the witness were enough to launch a large-scale check. At headquarters, on-duty officers compiled a list of all registered black pickup trucks within a few blocks of Sloan Avenue, then expanded to routes connecting to Memorial Boulevard and the small suburbs bordering the town. The initial list included officially registered vehicles, but the team knew well that many from this era had incomplete records or were bought and sold privately. The next step was hands-on screening by working directly with vehicle owners and local repair garages. A group of officers was assigned to familiar Lakeland resident garages for urgent checks. The mechanics there, who knew most local customers' vehicles inside out, were asked about black pickups serviced in recent months. Several were clearly identified from recent exhaust replacements, brake adjustments, or bed repaints. This list added vehicles not in registration records, while helping police eliminate those not matching the description, for example, trucks with longer beds, newer models or non-original black paint. Meanwhile, another group went door-to-door to homes with black pickups parked in yards or driveways. They inspected each one to verify paint condition, scratches, bed length, and features matching the witness's account. This checking extended beyond the disappearance neighborhood to two adjacent blocks, where some families owned old trucks for hauling produce or tools. Most owners cooperated, allowing police to note vehicle details. Others said they hadn't used their truck that afternoon when Lila vanished. From these initial screenings, the vehicle list expanded into detailed files covering owner, model, exterior condition, and where owners claimed to be that afternoon. Many were quickly eliminated due to alibis or mismatched features. However, a small group remained for closer scrutiny, especially those without witnesses confirming the owner's whereabouts during Lila's disappearance. A significant part of the investigation also focused on routes the black pickup was believed to have taken when leaving the area. Dirt roads leading to suburbs or sparsely populated house rows were marked to identify common parking spots for matching vehicles. Longtime patrol officers in the area were asked about any standout or frequently seen trucks. Some mentioned old ones near the small industrial zone, but none fully matched the description. The listing process wasn't just about the vehicle, but also timelines of each owner's whereabouts that afternoon. The team built schedules for matching vehicles and flagged those without alibi witnesses. This was a key step in filtering before identifying suspects driving them. Though the exact truck wasn't found, the process created the first foundational dataset for deeper suspect screening. Matching vehicles were grouped separately. Each had history, owner, usage frequency, and usual parking spot detailed. Comparing with routes the perpetrator likely used to flee, the team began narrowing the spatial range the black pickup probably traveled. From that information, the truck clue became one of the most important milestones in the hot phase. It not only directed the perpetrator hunt, but also helped police realize the act of taking Lila from the neighborhood was likely done by someone familiar with every shortcut around Sloan Avenue, and the remaining black pickups after filtering were the first doors leading to real suspects. All hope pinned on the black pickup list faded quickly as the team completed screening and realized none fully matched the witness's description. Those with similar scratches were inoperable that day. Those matching color and style had solid alibis. The rest either had unverifiable owners or vanished from the area right after without traces. The uncertainty deadlocked vehicle narrowing, and the black pickup file, initially the brightest lead, ultimately added to the case's confusion. Beyond vehicle pursuit, the suspect pool hit similar dead ends. Men living around Sloan Avenue or within range were preliminarily checked. Some were cleared with clear alibis, others didn't match the witness description, and the rest lacked any linking signs. The team persistently reviewed each name, but evidence was limited to one distant witness's account and a vanished truck. That wasn't enough for charges or even firm suspicion against anyone. Expanding searches beyond the neighborhood yielded nothing. Dirt roads to suburbs left no matching tire tracks. Vacant lots, warehouses, abandoned houses around Memorial Boulevard were checked repeatedly without new traces. Patrols covered quiet roads, but everywhere was suspiciously silent, offering no clues to the perpetrator's path after leaving the block. Evidence at this point was just the abandoned bicycle, indistinguishable ground marks altered by rain and wind, and the sole elderly witness's statement. No fingerprints, no dropped items, no drag or struggle marks. Even the incident area had no other witnesses seeing unusual movement beyond that one. The investigation fell into what police call nothing to go on. The longer it dragged, the slimmer the chances of finding Lila alive. In following days, neighborhood residents kept searching out of habit, but no one expected new traces. The case officer updated reports, but content gradually repeated. No additional witnesses, no new evidence, no suspicious black pickups beyond those clear. The case lost heat, giving way to lingering community despair. Lakeland Police Headquarters, after compiling all activities, noted no significant progress from initial leads. They'd checked vehicles, interviewed dozens, swept blocks-wide areas, and results were zero. No perpetrator, no clear direction, no data on Lila's path after disappearance. Reports thickened with notes, but lacked the key. A strong clue to break the impasse. As the first week ended, Lila Merritt's disappearance was officially marked difficult to solve and file. The team continued occasional reviews, but without resources for initial high priority. The juvenile crimes head admitted Lila's file would join long-term monitoring, mostly awaiting public tips or coincidences from other cases. That marked the case going cold, a phase where even persistent efforts couldn't overcome data absence. Remaining reports from early months showed only a vague perpetrator shadow and a truck that vanished faster than any traces. A case once shocking the community gradually buried in thick police files, and with the prolonged silence, no one knew it would take decades for those seemingly meaningless initial fragments to piece together the truth. The heavy atmosphere of the still unsolved disappearance continued to envelop the Sloan Avenue neighborhood when new information emerged, forcing the police to reopen the case. A man walking his dog along the irrigation canal near Munn Park, several miles from the residential area where Lila vanished, reported seeing a white object floating in the shallow water. The canal was not a place people frequently visited, as it was hidden behind a row of large trees, poorly lit, and mainly used for stormwater drainage, so anything appearing there easily felt out of the ordinary. The report immediately drew officers to the scene. The area was accessed via a grassy dirt path, leading down to the shallow canal with gently sloping banks. The water surface was murky and rippled, reflecting the late afternoon sunlight, surrounded by crowded old tree trunks and long vines. The damp ground, the smell of algae and the lingering moisture from the previous day's rain, made the place feel even more isolated from the rest of the town. Along the eastern bank near the water's edge, the small figure of a body lay on its side, caught in the roots protruding from the canal bank. That sight ended any faint hopes that had lingered from the early days. Police immediately sealed off the area, restricting public access to preserve the scene. The investigation team carefully approached the body, noting how it was partially entangled under the roots and partially floating with the gentle current. Although many days had passed since Lila's disappearance, the clothing on the body still matched the description provided by the family. This detail was enough to confirm that they were facing what everyone had feared. Beyond identifying the victim, the team focused on the environmental characteristics. The Munn Park Canal was isolated from residential areas, surrounded by rarely used trails. The terrain here was more complex than it appeared. Numerous small paths ran along the banks, shortcuts led to wild land, and large clusters of trees created natural blind spots. Someone familiar with the area could easily access the canal without being seen by residents, especially at night. The perpetrator's choice of this location to dispose of the body strongly suggested that he had lived or worked nearby. The ground around the canal bank showed no clear traces. Scattered rains had washed away any potential footprints or tire marks. Tall weeds made determining the perpetrator's approach route nearly impossible. However, the team noted some areas of lightly compressed soil on the western bank, a vague sign that might relate to the perpetrator standing or moving near the canal, but not clear enough for conclusion. In the initial sweep, none of Lila's personal items were found. No hair tie, no bicycle basket, no jewelry. Nothing to reveal more about the perpetrator's movements before reaching the canal. The absence of any items highlighted two possibilities. Either the perpetrator deliberately removed everything beforehand, or the transfer from the initial scene to the disposal site happened so quickly and cleanly that no item had a chance to fall. What drew the officers' attention most was the body's position. It was not in the middle of the channel but caught in the narrow section where the water was shallow and the flow slow. This indicated the perpetrator did not throw the body from a distance but likely went down to the water's edge and placed or pushed it into the canal. This was an action requiring calm and knowledge of the terrain, unlike a hasty disposal. These inferences were meticulously recorded as they could become key pieces in later identifying the perpetrator. Once the team completed scene documentation, the body was transported to the medical examiner's office for examination. From that moment, the case officially shifted in nature, no longer a missing person case with slim hope, but a homicide. The officers knew that all prior search efforts had to continue in a completely different direction, one demanding answers about what happened during the time Lila was missing and why the body was taken to a remote place like Munn Park. No one there needed to say it. The discovery of the body marked the end of the hot investigation phase, while opening a new chapter, much darker and far less predictable. The case was no longer just one family's fear, but a wound for the entire Lakeland community. The body was brought to the Polk County Medical Examiner's office in the late afternoon, where forensic pathologists worked under the limited conditions of 1955, relying mainly on visual observation, manual measurements, and traditional medical knowledge. No DNA testing, no cell separation techniques, no modern microscopic analysis. Every assessment depended on marks on the body, tissue condition and physical signs that time had not yet erased. The pathologist handling the case began with an overall record: height, build, clothing, external signs. The clothing on Lila's body confirmed she was wearing the outfit initially described by the family, and though wet, it was intact enough to indicate the transport distance was not excessive. The body's condition revealed that time of death did not coincide with the disappearance, but occurred considerably later. One of the first conclusions that weighed heavily on the room. It meant Lila had remained resigned for a significant period before being killed. Based on rigor mortis, soft tissue condition, decomposition level, and water exposure, the pathologist estimated Lila died many hours to nearly 2 days after disappearing. This time frame supported the hypothesis that the victim was held elsewhere before being taken to Munn Park Canal. The reasoning was reinforced by skin marks in areas of prolonged contact with a hard surface, indicating she had lain on a flat or rough floor, not natural ground. Bruises and minor injuries on the body confirmed Lila did not die accidentally, but was clearly a victim of violence. However, the injury extent lacked detail to pinpoint exact actions, due to the era's examination limitations. These signs were recorded only as evidence of restraint and detention before death. While examining the hair and clothing, the pathologist found a few stray hairs that did not match Lila's color or structure. At that time, hair analysis was limited to comparing color and thickness under a magnifying glass. Identifying the owner was impossible. The hairs were collected, placed in paper envelopes, and sealed for storage, though it was unknown when they might be useful. On the collar and sleeve of Lila's clothing was a small dark fabric piece, different in material from what she wore. The pathologist carefully removed it for the evidence file. They could not know if it came from the perpetrator's clothing or another surface during transport, but it was preserved in hopes it might one day provide more information. While checking scratched skin areas, the pathologist noted a very small amount of foreign skin cells under Lila's fingernails, possibly from defensive struggle. However, in 1955, no methods existed to extract, analyze, or compare skin cells. These tiny samples were thus sealed and noted in the file, lying silent in a metal refrigerated cabinet, like countless evidences awaiting future technology. Beyond direct victim details, the pathologist recorded environmental forensic features. Decomposition consistent with the body being placed in the canal shortly before discovery. Mud on the legs and clothing suggested contact at a shallow bank, not deep water. This implied the perpetrator knew the area well, choosing a secluded spot with minimal flow to prevent the body from drifting far. All data was handwritten in a multi-page forensic report. Though it neither identified the perpetrator nor narrowed suspects, it established a key fact. Lila was held against her will for a considerable time before being killed. This meant the perpetrator was not impulsive, but had a location, time, and circumstances for detention. At that time, forensic technology limits prevented further conclusions. The fabric pieces, hairs, and skin cells were collected with faint hope that future technology might decode what night. The case thus entered a phase of incomplete records, with more questions than answers, and a large gap in the pursuit of the perpetrator. The initial forensic conclusions, though limited, added crucial pieces to the picture the investigation team was trying to complete. Lila being held for an extended period before the body was taken to Munn Park Canal allowed them for the first time to seriously consider the perpetrator's behavior rather than just scattered evidence. Records from the scene, witness statements, and the bicycle's location were aligned to outline the most likely route the perpetrator took on the afternoon. Lila vanished. The area behind Henderson's market, a narrow obscured road leading to many old trails, became central to the first hypothesis. The bicycle's abandonment spot lay directly on a shortcut connecting Sloan Avenue to numerous paths into less traveled land. The terrain structure led police to note that the perpetrator almost certainly knew every small path, hidden spot, and quick escape from the neighborhood. A stranger would unlikely approach Lila and leave so cleanly without mistake. The witness statement of a man carrying Lila to a black pickup truck matched remarkably with the bicycle location and potential escapes. The man did not hesitate or fumble, but acted quickly and decisively. This suggested the perpetrator had pre-selected the approach point, a quiet stretch without direct house views, near roads to uncontrolled areas. Such a pattern often indicated not random opportunity, but prior observation or at least frequent passage. From the bicycle location, investigators outlined 3 possible escape directions. First, follow the dirt path behind Henderson's market to loop toward open land behind Carver Street. This route had the advantage of few homes, easy blending into darkness, and low attention if driving slowly. Second, turn onto the dirt road to Memorial Boulevard, a connector to a small industrial area with detached warehouses and shops. This suited someone familiar with the terrain, knowing it had little pedestrian traffic. Third, loop south, crossing old houses on the town edge with warehouses, old wood shops, and abandoned buildings. This area had formerly stored equipment and materials, offering many secluded spots to hold a child without suspicion. The body's discovery at Munn Park Canal helped narrow possibilities to two main directions. The canal lay near the boundary between residential and industrial zones, an area no one visited without clear reason. Comparing terrain maps and the most convenient route for a small truck, police saw high likelihood that the perpetrator took Lila to a secluded spot near the industrial area, held her for 1 to 2 days, then moved to the canal for disposal. Forensic traces of Lila lying on a flat or rough surface further supported the idea that the perpetrator had a private space, an old warehouse, empty garage or small repair shop. Such places were scattered around Lakeland in 1955, especially near Memorial Boulevard, home to small facilities serving agriculture and construction. The team began linking witness descriptions of the perpetrator's build to common local occupation. The man had confident strides, quick actions, and used an older short-bed truck, traits fitting manual labor, repair work, or jobs requiring hauling. No signs he struggled carrying Lila or loading her, suggesting good physical condition and familiarity with physical work. When placing all factors on one chart, the bigger picture emerged. The perpetrator knew the residential terrain and area behind Henderson's market well. He knew how to leave the neighborhood via low-traffic routes. He had access to a secluded location for holding the victim. He was calm enough to take the body to Munn Park Canal, a place hard to access without environmental knowledge. From these assessments, the team reached the first major behavioral conclusion. The perpetrator was almost certainly local, having lived, worked, or at least frequently traveled the related areas. A passing stranger in Lakeland could hardly execute such a seamless chain of actions, leaving no traces and choosing such hidden spots. Though the files still lacked too much data for identification, this reconstruction shaped a behavioral profile that later investigators, over decades, would rely on to continue the search. It was the first time they saw a vague but directed portrait of the person who took Lila from Sloan Avenue and vanished into Lakeland's back paths. The behavioral analyses and rote reconstructions in the Lila Merritt case led the investigation team to a critical conclusion that the perpetrator was most likely a local, someone familiar with the terrain, possessing suitable transportation, and able to access secluded areas around Lakeland. Based on that reasoning, police focused on men aged roughly from late teens to 30s, who lived or worked within a few miles of Sloan Avenue. An initial list totaling 27 names was compiled, drawn from vehicle registration records, occupations and daily activities, gathered by the team from prior canvasses. Investigators began by examining the vehicle details of each person on the list. Those owning pickup trucks, especially dark-colored ones, short bed styles, or showing signs of age, were prioritized for thorough checks. However, simply owning a similar vehicle was not enough to elevate someone to high suspicion. Each truck had to be cross-referenced against witness descriptions: paint color, size, scratches on the passenger side door, bed type, and ability to navigate narrow paths behind the grocery store. The early screening process yielded many quick eliminations. Some owned black pickups but with models too new or too long, not matching the short bed style described by witness. Others had older trucks, fitting the description, but had solid alibis for the afternoon. Lila disappeared, as they were working at facilities with multiple witnesses. The remaining individuals mismatched the witnesses' impressions in build, age, or facial features regarding the figure seen lifting Lila into the truck. The narrowing of the list continued based on daily routines and living circumstances. A man working night shifts at an industrial park was eliminated because at the time of the incident, he was sleeping in worker dorms, with confirmation. A delivery driver who frequently passed through the Sloan Avenue area was ruled out after his vehicle was inspected and showed no characteristic scratches described by witness. A pump repair shop owner was also eliminated as he had been in another town that afternoon, inspecting equipment for a client, backed by receipts. Ultimately, the list of 27 narrowed to 9 names requiring closer scrutiny. These individuals lacked solid alibis, owned pickups or had access to similar ones, and lived in areas that could lead to routes matching the team's reconstructed path. Within this smaller group, the name Harold Bixby appeared for the first time, a 22-year-old man living less than a mile from Sloan Avenue. Bixby worked at a small radio repair shop near Memorial Boulevard, an area with numerous warehouses and discrete pathways, fitting the perpetrator's behavioral profile. He owned an older pickup for transporting repair equipment, dark-colored and relatively matching the witness description. At the time of inclusion on the list, initial data about his truck drew more attention to him than to some other suspects. However, cross-checking witness statements quickly led to Bixby's elimination. Witnesses described the perpetrator as somewhat shorter and stockier, whereas Bixby was noticeably taller and slender. The passenger door of Bixby's truck, when inspected by police, also lacked the described scratch. Though they could not determine if the truck had been repaired or doors replaced, this mismatch prompted his immediate removal from primary suspicion. Beyond the vehicle and build, Bixby's schedule that day was also verified. He stated he was working on radio repairs at the shop, and a coworker confirmed seeing him in the late afternoon. Although this confirmation did not fully cover the exact time of Lila's disappearance, police deemed the overall match too low to pursue further. Bixby's elimination happened so swiftly that his name only briefly appeared in a small section of the summary report. No one on the investigation team at the time realized this was a critical misstep, due to the lack of modern cross-verification technique. Police turned back to the remaining names on the list of 9, trying to find a better fit with the fragmented picture they were attempting to assemble. The initial suspect list ended in a deadlock similar to prior phases of the investigation. No name carried enough weight to become the primary focus. The entire team recognized they faced a long list of possibilities but lacked clear evidence to charge anyone. Despite efforts to narrow the scope, the investigation direction yielded no clearer path, and so the name Harold Bixby, along with many others, was sidelined as seemingly unrelated to the case, a mistake that would only become evident decades later. The initial suspect list closed amid a lack of evidence that prevented the investigation team from advancing further, and from there the Lila Merritt case file was gradually shifted to long-term monitoring status. In the early 1960s, the Lakeland police force underwent numerous personnel changes. Officers who had worked the active investigation retired, transferred, or were reassigned to other units. Each time a new lead took over the file, they would review the event summary, examine the scant remaining physical evidence, and then return the file to its place in the cabinet of unsolved cases. During this early period, a few efforts to reopen the investigation were made. Some younger investigators, upon reading Lila's file, were often drawn in by the case's severity and the illogical nature of the perpetrator's escape behavior. They attempted to recheck the suspect list, review proposed routes, and scour the 1955 reports for any overlooked detail. However, all efforts remained at the level of paperwork review, as no new leads emerged from the community or from any related cases in the area. As time passed, those who had lived around Sloan Avenue that year gradually moved away. Many old warehouses and wood shops were demolished or upgraded, causing suspected locations in the perpetrator's behavioral profile to nearly vanish from the landscape. By the late 1960s and into the 1970s, major social events in Florida further strained resources for old cases. The Lakeland Police Department had to prioritize rising crimes like theft, street violence, and issues related to migrant labor. The Lila Merritt case became just one entry in the list of long-standing files, occasionally opened, but never to the degree needed to restart a full investigation. In the 1970s, forensic technology saw some slow advancements, but it had not yet reached the capability to exploit tiny samples like fabric scraps, hairs, or skin cells collected in. Investigators sometimes sent these samples to state labs, but results only confirmed they were too small or lacking distinct features for deeper analysis. No reports helped narrow the suspect list, and many original suspects had moved, changed jobs, or in some cases passed away. Into the 1980s, the advent of new case storage methods and small-scale cold case review programs brought renewed attention in a few sweeps. Some experienced investigators of that era tried approaching the case from different angles. They considered the possibility that the perpetrator was not on the original list of 27, or had altered appearance or vehicle soon after the crime. Another direction suggested the perpetrator might not own the pickup, but borrowed or used a relative's. However, every hypothesis hit the same old barrier: lack of evidence for comparison. Any promising theory could not progress without new data to match or verify. Many reports from this period recorded the same conclusions: no new information, unable to identify suspect individual, or unable to verify vehicle. As years passed, expectations of solving the case dwindled, and the Lila Merritt case became one of the longest silent files in storage. Officers who had been at the original scene gradually left the force. Memories of the case survived only in hastily written notes, and a few oral stories passed between police generations. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, changes in classifying cold cases began, but they were still insufficient to fully reopen Lila's file. DNA matching technology was emerging worldwide, but remained unfamiliar to many small departments like Lakeland's, and more importantly, no one considered that the tiny 1955 samples might be usable in the future. Over 3 decades, Lila's file passed through many investigators' hands, each leaving their own notes, but none solving the unfinished puzzle. The metal cabinet for old cases gradually became the resting place for countless similar unsolved files, and Lila Merritt's name remained on the list of children whose truth was never found. By the early 1990s, the case was officially classified as a long-term cold case, one with near zero chance of closure. No investigator could have foreseen that just a few decades later, the seemingly useless tiny samples, sealed since 1955, would hold the key to reopening a door once thought permanently closed. The late 1990s and early 2000s passed without any progress on the Lila Merritt file, to the point that many new officers were unaware the 1955 case had once shaken Lakeland. Yet the turning point arrived in 2018, not from a new witness or sudden confession, but from what seemed like purely administrative work: digitizing the old case files at the Lakeland Police Department. This was part of a statewide data modernization program to transfer decades-old yellowed paper records into electronic systems. A team of young staff was assigned to open each file box, categorize cases, scan documents, and back up information. While checking an old metal cabinet, an unlabeled box was pulled out. Inside was a thick stack of documents with frayed edges and faded ink, topped with the words, "Merritt." One investigator involved in digitization, interested in unsolved cases, opened the file for a closer look. Amid the documents, in the evidence section, he discovered a thick paper envelope, carefully sealed with an old Polk County forensic stamp. Under the storage room lights, the handwritten text on the envelope became clearer: fabric scrap, hair, skin sample, unable to analyze. He immediately recognized these as the samples mentioned in the 1955 forensics report, collected from Lila's body but unusable due to limited technology at the time. The surprise was that the envelope had been preserved better than expected: no mold, seal intact, and contents relatively undisturbed. The discovery was quickly reported up the chain. A team from the cold case unit was mobilized to re-examine all evidence and assess if the samples remained viable for analysis. Everyone understood that 63-year-old samples might have degraded, but their sealed condition offered some hope. They held an urgent meeting to decide next steps. Modern DNA techniques in 2018 far surpassed what forensics could achieve in the previous century. Many old cases had been solved using tiny samples: a few skin cells, a rootless hair, or fabric with invisible traces. Thus the team concluded that no matter how small the envelope's contents, they might contain enough genetic material for testing. Submitting the samples required strict protocol. The envelope was externally inspected, photographed from all sides, then unsealed under 3 witnesses to ensure no handling errors. All fabric scraps, hairs, and adhered skin cells from the inner surface were transferred to specialized containers and sent to the state DNA lab equipped for touch DNA technology, capable of extracting genetic kit from extremely small cell amount. For the Lakeland cold case team, sending the samples was not just a technical step, but the start of renewed hope. For over 6 decades, the case had been shrouded in layers of disappointment and silence. For the first time in years, they held something prior generations lacked: scientific capability to hear the story carried by those silent samples. No one dared predict outcomes. They knew the samples might be too degraded or lack sufficient DNA, but they also knew that even a single viable nucleotide sequence could completely alter the case's trajectory. The envelope's rediscovery was not a miracle but a reminder that in investigations, seemingly useless details can become keys if revisited at the right moment. That evidence envelope, a piece of paper lost for over half a century in a metal cabinet, now became the center of new hope. No one knew it was about to open the path to the answer Lakeland had awaited for The results from the state lab did not come back immediately, but when the first report was sent back to the investigation team, every eye focused on a single line. The sample collected from the 1955 envelope had yielded an incomplete but usable DNA profile. This was an achievement that investigators decades earlier could never have imagined. The skin cell sample was so tiny, it was barely visible to the naked eye. Yet modern touch DNA technology had extracted a genetic sequence long enough for in-depth analysis. This DNA profile was not sufficient to directly identify an individual using traditional methods, but it was suitable for uploading to commercial databases and genetic genealogy systems, a field increasingly used in cold cases across the United States. With the approval of the prosecutor's office, the investigation team submitted the DNA sequence to a genealogy platform used by law enforcement agencies, where it could be compared against millions of samples from citizens who had registered for family testing. Not long after, the system returned the first results, several distant genetic matches belonging to remote relatives from both sides of the family. Genetic genealogy experts from the state of Florida were brought in to assist. They reconstructed the family tree based on the genetic matches, narrowing down branches to find individuals closely enough related to the presumed perpetrator's DNA sequence. The process was like following a blood trail across generations, piecing together small fragments to locate a single person in the larger picture. The analysis results gradually led to a group of relatives living in Florida during the 1950s, many of whom had resided not far from Lakeland. From this broad branch, the genealogy experts narrowed it down to just a few small families, including one with the surname Bixby. Based on centimorgan ratios, a unit used to measure genetic relatedness, the experts determined that the perpetrator was very likely someone from the Bixby branch living in the Polk County area during the mid-old census records, birth certificates, property deeds, and military registrations were reviewed one by one. Documents that once seemed meaningless now became critical data for reconstructing the lineage. From all this information, the name that stood out first was Harold Bixby, who lived in Lakeland at the exact time Lila Merritt disappeared. Bixby had appeared on the initial suspect list but was eliminated because he did not match the hasty witness description, and because his car showed no scratches at the time of inspection. However, genetic genealogy showed Bixby belonged to the group with the closest relation to the recovered DNA sample. Other men in the family branch either did not live near Sloan Avenue in 1955 or had employment records proving they were elsewhere when the crime occurred. The younger investigators of 2018 began digging back into everything related to Harold Bixby. They accessed employment records, residency data, and the original 9 details that had been overlooked before, such as Bixby working at a radio repair shop near Memorial Boulevard, an area with many old warehouses fitting the hypothesis of a holding location, suddenly aligned with the behavioral analysis constructed decades earlier. Combining all the DNA data, genealogy, residency history, and the nature of Bixby's work, the investigation team reached a critical conclusion. Harold Bixby was not just a potential suspect, but the name that best fit within the entire family branch and met all the elements of the perpetrator's behavioral profile. A new report was compiled, this time based not on speculation but on genetic evidence recovered after 63 years. With just a tiny cell sample, modern technology had pulled the name Bixby back into the light and opened the clearest investigative direction the case had ever had. The results from DNA and genealogy analysis had brought Harold Bixby back to the center of the case, but to take the crucial next step, obtaining an arrest warrant, the investigation team needed a human element to supplement the gradually completing file. That missing piece was the only witness who had ever seen the man carrying Lila to the car in night. Although his initial statement had shaped the early investigation direction, identification conditions were lacking at the time, and the case had gradually gone cold. Now, with genetic data pointing to Bixby, the team decided to track down the man who had witnessed that brief but decisive moment. The witness, now an elderly man, was living in a small house not far from Sloan Avenue. He was over 80, his mental sharpness no longer what it once was, but the memory of the man carrying a little girl down the road behind Henderson's Market was something he had never forgotten. When the investigation team contacted him and explained there were new developments in the Lila Merritt case, he agreed to cooperate, though initially hesitant out of concern that his memory might no longer be accurate enough. The interview took place in his small living room, where old family photos hung along the walls. The team brought a thin folder containing an age-progressed image of Harold Bixby in his youth, created from military registration photos and personal documents from them. The image was not intended to definitively confirm identity but to recreate the build, face and overall physique of Bixby in his 20s, the age that matched the witness's recollection. When the image was placed on the table, he looked at it for a long time, as if trying to transport his mind back more than 6 decades. His eyes slowly moved from the jawline down to the shoulders, then stopped at the eyes in the photo. In the prolonged silence, the investigator said nothing, waiting for his natural reaction. Finally, he spoke, slowly but firmly. He described again the build he had seen, youthful, somewhat slender, with a quick agility. He said the man had bent down to pick up the little girl smoothly, as if accustomed to lifting heavy objects, or working in an environment requiring physical strength. When comparing it to the reconstructed image, the witness nodded, acknowledging many similarities, especially in the jawline and shoulder shape. Although he could not definitively say that is the man who carried Lila, he was confident enough to state that this image looked more like anyone he had seen since then, among all the photos police had ever shown him. What particularly caught the team's attention was his reaction to the photo. It was not vague or hesitant as in previous years, but a sense of recognizing something familiar, something only long-held memory could retain. The witness also confirmed that the build in the photo matched how the man moved quickly and decisively that afternoon in 1955, a detail he had mentioned in his initial statement, but which had never been deeply explored. Additionally, when the investigator asked about the truck, he confirmed that the man in the photo seemed fitting to drive an old short-bed truck, a small detail but one that aligned with Bixby's early job at the radio repair shop near Memorial Boulevard. Each piece of the image he described further convinced the team that this match was not coincidental. If the 1955 statement had been too vague to keep Bixby on the suspect list, now combined with genetic data, it became a key piece strengthening the argument. At the end of the interview, the witness reiterated that his memory had faded, but some images never disappear, especially in a serious case like this. The team did not expect absolute confirmation. They knew that after more than 60 years, it was impossible. What they needed was a reasonable connection between science and human memory, and the interview had taught that. With the reconstructed image of Bixby showing many similarities according to the witness, the DNA file matching at a high level with the Bixby family brand, and behavioral factors aligning with his occupation and the terrain where he lived, the investigation team had sufficient grounds to prepare for an arrest warrant. A case that seemed forever confined to memory now had a concrete path to resolution. All starting from the combination of modern technology and the memory of the only surviving witness from that fateful afternoon. And the important confirmations from the witness, though not absolute, paved the way for the investigation team to synthesize all evidence over 7 decades. For the first time constructing a complete picture of what happened in the summer of from behavioral data, forensic evidence, genealogy information and residency history, they began fitting together the scattered pieces, fragments once considered meaningless for decades, into a logical and consistent timeline. This was the final step to confirm the perpetrator's identity before filing for an arrest warrant. The reconstructed timeline began with the afternoon Lila Merritt disappeared. The location of the bicycle, the witness's statement about the man carrying her to a black truck, and the characteristics of the shortcuts around Henderson's market, indicated that the perpetrator had to be someone familiar with the. This behavioral profile fit perfectly with Harold Bixby, who lived just a short distance from Sloan Avenue and worked at a radio repair shop near Memorial Boulevard, where there were countless warehouses and discrete paths, matching the holding location analysis. When cross-referencing Bixby's personal timeline with the case elements, the team found he was exactly the right age, had a job regularly involving truck travel, and access to routes the perpetrator likely used. Although in 1955 Bixby had a weak alibi and minor identification discrepancies that led to his early elimination, the new data rendered those old exclusion reasons invalid. The team also discovered that the initial witness identifications were mostly based on a figure seen in late afternoon light, something easily misleading, especially from a memory lasting only seconds. In the next step, route maps were reconstructed, incorporating period terrain details, dirt roads, overgrown lots, old factory areas, and paths along the Munn Park water channels. The path from where Lila was abducted to where her body was found matched perfectly with routes Bixby could travel by truck without drawing attention. These dark, deserted areas were all near where he worked or frequently passed. All the 1955 forensic data was placed into modern context. The strange fabric scrap, hairs not belonging to Lila, and skin cells collected from the victim's fingernails all shared a common trait. DNA extracted from the 2018 sample set showed genetic markers matching the Bixby family branch. Genealogy experts confirmed the highest probability match was with Harold Bixby, not any other male family member, because their residency history and ages did not fit the case context. The partial DNA data, though not a complete profile, was compared against the expanded family tree to eliminate individuals one by one. The results showed only Bixby lived close enough, was the right age, had suitable transportation, and met the behavioral factors constructed by modern analysis. Other men from the same family branch either did not live in the Lakeland area in 1955 or did not fit the behavioral profile. From a criminal psychology perspective, Bixby's profile in later years, quiet, no criminal record, unremarkable, further supported the conclusion. He fit the type of perpetrator who acted impulsively but discreetly, committing a single crime then retreating into normal life, consistent with profiles many crime analysts see in mid-20th century child abduction. There were no contradictions in the new data, and every piece fit Bixby's position in the timeline. The witness, the only person who saw the perpetrator, when shown the reconstructed image of young Bixby, recognized many similarities with the figure he remembered from that fateful afternoon. Though memory had faded over time, his natural reaction recognizing familiar shape and movement was considered additional reinforcement rather than standalone evidence. All the data, forensic, genetic genealogy, behavioral modeling, route mapping, reconfirmed witness statement, and 1955 employment records, was consolidated into a single report. The report was reviewed item by item to ensure no contradictions between physical evidence, genealogical evidence, and witness information. There was no point in the report leading to another suspect. The case was no longer in the realm of speculation. After 70 years, all the scattered facts had been pieced together into a coherent picture, pointing to a single name, Harold Bixby. With the alignment of modern science and historical data, the investigation team finally had enough grounds to proceed to the next step, obtaining an arrest warrant and preparing to prosecute a case once considered unsolvable. The consolidated report, cross-verified and authenticated by both forensic and genetic genealogy experts, was forwarded to the prosecutor's office that same week. Once the prosecutor concluded that the entirety of the evidence was strong enough to proceed with charges, the arrest warrant for Harold Bixby was signed. After more than 7 decades, the name that had been removed from the suspect list in 1955 now became the center of a small-scale but meticulously prepared arrest operation. The investigative team determined that Bixby was currently living in Sarasota in a quiet single-story house in a residential neighborhood near the edge of the city. He was in his 80s, lived alone, and had almost no interaction with neighbors beyond brief greeting. No one in the area knew anything about Bixby's past, or that he had once lived in Lakeland in his youth. This required the approach to be carried out with caution, ensuring both the safety of the officers and avoiding unnecessary alarm to the surrounding resident. On the morning of the warrant execution, the sky over Sarasota was overcast, with low clouds hanging over the trees lining the streets. 3 unmarked police vehicles stopped a short distance from Bixby's house, and the task force, dressed in plain clothes, approached the front door. An officer knocked according to procedure and clearly read the arrest warrant when Bixby appeared at the threshold. He seemed confused, not understanding what was happening, but did not resist. His aged hands trembled slightly as they were cuffed, an image no one could have imagined belonging to the prime suspect in a case that had shocked Florida. As Bixby was escorted to the vehicle, another team began searching the house under a court-issued warrant. The small, tidy but dated home contained many items from previous decades. On the wooden shelves in the living room were old radios, repair tools, and a few pieces of equipment similar to those he had used while working at the radio repair shop near Memorial Boulevard in his younger years. In the back storage room, police discovered a loosely locked small wooden box. Upon opening it, they found numerous items from the 1950s, machinery catalogs, old electronics repair kits, some vintage short bed truck parts, and a few personal belongings from Bixby's youth. There was no direct physical evidence linking to the Lila Merritt case, but these items clearly showed that Bixby had owned or had access to vehicles and equipment identical to those described in the 19. Notably, a small notebook with numerous notes on roads in Lakeland, a hand-sketched partial map of dirt roads leading to the shop area and the canal bank, was found in a desk drawer. These details held no absolute legal value on their own, but they added context to the already airtight case built by the investigative team. Bixby was taken to the Sarasota police station before being transferred to Polk County for formal questioning. As he was led into the interrogation room, his face reflected the weariness of old age, but showed no deep panic or surprise. He only asked one question: why me? A question that seemed not as a denial, but rather the final reaction of someone who had lived too long with his secret. At the detention center, Polk County investigators were waiting with the full attached case file, DNA profile, genealogy chart, witness statements, route maps, and 19. After completing the suspect intake procedures, the formal interrogation was scheduled for the following day, a confrontation that the team knew could be the last opportunity to hear Harold Bixby speak about what had happened on that afternoon nearly 70 years ago. Bixby was held in a private cell under constant supervision. The metal door closing behind him marked the moment when the Lila Merritt case, once thought buried forever, finally reached its most critical turning point, a direct confrontation with the man whom all the evidence pointed to as the perpetrator. Part 17, Confession and the Final 48 Hours. The interrogation the following morning took place in a small room, where harsh white lights shone down on Harold Bixby's aged face. He sat upright, his hands clasped together on the cold steel table. As the investigators presented the DNA file, the genealogy tree, witness confirmations and the entire reconstructed chain of data one by one, none of it provoked a strong reaction from Bixby. Instead, he let out a heavy sigh, as if it was time to face what he knew he could no longer hide. "Do you have anything you'd like to explain?" the investigator asked, starting cautiously. A long silence passed before Bixby nodded slightly, his eyes no longer avoiding contact. He did not deny his role. He offered no excuse. He simply began to speak slowly and haltingly, but clearly enough for the team to understand what had happened. He admitted that on that afternoon, he had seen Lila walking alone on the road behind Henderson's market. He said there was no prior plan, his actions were impulsive. When the opportunity arose, he subdued the girl and placed her in the short bed truck he used to transport radio repair tools. What happened afterward, he described only in minimal details, as required in interrogation protocols for child victims. Bixby stated that Lila was held in a small room behind the radio repair shop, where he had worked in. This room, according to his description, was a storage area for old equipment, rarely visited by others, with a back door opening onto a dirt path, leading to the shop area, and a trail running straight to secluded spots that the investigative team had identified in their behavioral model. Bixby said no one knew he used that room after hours, and since the shop operated in shifts, he could easily access it without drawing attention. The description matched remarkably with the 1955 forensic assessment of signs that the victim had lain on a rough, flat surface. When asked about disposing of the body, Bixby admitted that after nearly 2 days, as the situation became too tense and news spread throughout the town, he panicked. He waited until late at night, wrapped the body simply, loaded it into the truck, and drove along the dirt road connecting the radio repair shop to the densely wooded area near the Munn Park water canal. This road was exactly the one the team had reconstructed from old topographic maps, avoiding residential areas, staying off main roads, crossing trails between abandoned warehouses, then following a path along the tree line to reach the canal. Bixby said he chose that spot believing the flowing water would wash away all traces. He did not know that at the time, the water in the canal was shallower than he thought. The investigators asked one final question. "Why did you take Lila there?" Bixby offered no specific reason. He simply said, "I didn't know what else to do." The sparse answer aligned with the behavioral profile, an impulsive offender. not a sophisticated planner. At the end of the interrogation, Bixby's confession, though lacking in detail and without self-justification, confirmed nearly the entire investigative framework built from forensic evidence, genetic data, and behavioral reconstruction. Most importantly, every part of his statement matched elements that could not have been known in advance: the location where the victim was held, the transport routes, the approach to the canal, and an environment where the body was found. There were no contradictions with the case file. No details conflicted with the forensic data or 19. Bixby's confession thus became the final piece, locking in the entire 70-year investigation, a journey that began with an abandoned bicycle and ended with the admission from the very person who had silenced the Lila Merritt case for decades. When Harold Bixby's confession was verified and the formal indictment was announced, Polk County and the entire Lakeland area were swept by a wave of indescribable emotions. Florida media covered it intensely, with many outlets using the phrase, 70-year cold case. But what shocked residents was not just that the perpetrator had finally been identified, but the reality that he had been a local, living right in the community in 1955. Not a mysterious stranger, not a fleeting shadow, but an ordinary young man of the town at the time. Elderly residents who had lived near the Sloan Avenue area back then shared that they had never suspected Bixby. He was quiet and unassuming, but not someone who stood out. The case had sown fear for many months, but when it faded into silence, everyone tried to move on. Now, with the truth revealed, the entire community felt transported back to 1955, with all the confusion and pain that had seemed long buried. The Merritt family, the descendants of Evelyn and Tommy, received the news with a heavy but complete heart. They said that although Lila could never return, knowing the truth at last was the closure the family had waited for across generations. A granddaughter of Tommy's spoke at a small press conference. "We are not seeking revenge. We just needed to know that Lila was not forgotten." That statement was repeated many times on evening newscasts. The Lila Merritt case quickly became a major topic in legal seminars and detective conferences. The first lesson drawn was the tortoise of preserving evidence, even when it seems useless. The envelope containing fabric scraps, hair and skin cells, a tiny item forgotten in a metal cabinet for over 6 decades, had become the key to unlocking the case. Many investigators admitted that without the 2018 digitization process, the case might have remained in the dark forever. The second lesson concerned the value of modern forensics, particularly genetic genealogy. In 1955, no one could have imagined that a few skin cells caught on the victim's hands could become powerful evidence. But that technology narrowed down the Bixby family line, identified the relevant branch, and ultimately pinpointed Harold Bixby as the only suspect fitting every data point. The story is now used by many Florida police units as an example in cold case training courses. The third impact extended to child protection. Many Florida localities used the Lila case as a basis to strengthen rapid response protocols for missing minors, improving coordination between police, communities and local oversight units. Some proposals for early warning systems for missing children in Florida gained stronger momentum after the case was solved, even though they were not directly tied to the Amber Alert system that emerged decades later. When the court announced the final conclusion and officially closed the Lila Merritt case file, many Lakeland residents gathered at Munn Park, where her body had been found. There was no grand memorial, just a few bouquets of flowers, an old photo of Lila placed on a bench, and the solemn silence of those who wanted to witness the permanent closure of a story that had spanned nearly. The Lila Merritt case was not just a journey to find the perpetrator, it was also a reminder to the entire community that the truth sometimes takes a lifetime to emerge. Thanks to the persistence of multiple generations of investigators, modern forensic technology and the small surviving evidence envelope, one of Lakeland's most heartbreaking losses was finally brought to light. After nearly 7 decades, the name Lila Merritt had its answer, and the case that seemed destined to sleep forever was at last closed. In America today, the story of Lila Merritt is not just a case from Lakeland in 1955, but a very real reminder of how we protect children and pursue justice. Lila disappeared right on Sloan Avenue, in what seemed like a safe neighborhood, simply riding her bike with her brother behind Henderson's Market, the kind of peaceful neighborhood that many American families still believe is harmless. The perpetrator, Harold Bixby, was not a mysterious stranger from far away, but a local who worked at a radio repair shop near Memorial Boulevard, driving a familiar old pickup. This reminds us that in America today, when teaching kids about stranger danger, parents also need to talk about safe boundaries and trusting one's instincts even around familiar faces that make a child feel uneasy. Another detail worth reflecting on is the small evidence envelope, fabric scraps, hairs, skin cells, forgotten in a metal cabinet for over 60 years. But it, combined with modern DNA and genealogy technology, unlocked the entire case. In everyday life, this is like respecting data, records, and evidence, from home security cameras and files to being ready to cooperate with police when you have information. Never think this little thing doesn't matter. For the community, the fact that the elderly witness still remembered and was willing to review the reconstructed image of Bixby shows that memory and civic responsibility can endure for decades. In a vast country like the United States, protecting children is not just the job of families or police, but a combination of vigilant communities, legal systems committed to preserving records, and a society willing to invest in forensic science so that no child is forgotten in the file. Thank you for joining us on this journey to close the nearly 70-year case of Lila Merritt, the truth revealed only through persistence and the power of modern science. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue following these humane case-solving stories, and see us again in the next video.